we're driving down the 405 freeway, driving north, you make a hard right turn with your head and you might catch a glimpse of these vineyards, which are beautiful. I walked in the gate, I realized and I felt like I was in the middle of what would have been traditional wine country. And that's not what we're here. People have heard this idea that this vineyard exists, but this isn't a toy here. This is some serious winemaking. And the reason I showed up is because when we tasted together at the Four Seasons, I mean, I was blown away by the quality of the wine.
Sit back and grab a glass. It's Wine Talks with Paul K.
Here to have a conversation with Paul at Moraga Vineyard. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you. Glad you could be here today.
This is the kind of thing that makes this industry fun. You know, and I do this. Yesterday I was playing golf. My buddy said, "Oh, what are you doing now? You're retired." I go, "Yeah, but really I'm having more fun and I'm learning more than I've ever learned." And it's because of shows like this one that we're going to have. Being up in Bel Air and having and tasting wine.
You would never know that we're here.
Though somebody said, and I didn't catch this, but you cannot see the vineyards from the 405 freeway.
You can, if you know when to look and where to look, you can just see them if you're heading north.
Yeah. Okay. So we are in at Moraga Vineyards. It's in Bel Air. It's in the famed part of Los Angeles, known for its hillsides and mansions and proximity to Beverly Hills. But we're at a winery. How many acres do we have under vine here?
Under vine, 7 1/4. The entire property is roughly 16 1/2 acres.
Wow. You know what's kind of interesting? I saw this. We're just going to jump in. You've got various, and I try to stay away from wine geeky stuff, but I have to here. You have various direction-facing slopes here.
Oh, we do. We have a variety.
Yeah.
And to good and sometimes ill effect. We can take some photos of this later, but we do have one hillside that is relatively close proximity to the floor of this canyon, and one side faces north and one side faces south. And it was a singular block of Merlot, and the prior winemaker recognized 15, 18 years ago that the north side of the block ripened about 3 weeks after the south side.
Oh, interesting.
That faced the sun.
Yeah.
So, being a small winery like we are, small winery and vineyard, they ripped out, or actually they didn't rip out, they just lopped off the tops of the vines that had Merlot and they grafted Sauvignon Blanc onto it because it wasn't worth their effort to try and keep it unified in one block. By the time they would pick the one side that ripened earlier, the fermentation would near be over for that wine when they then got around to picking.
Yeah, right.
When and I don't want to say when they got around, when the other side of the block was ready to be picked.
Yep.
So they just said, F it, and grafted it over to Sauvignon Blanc, and now it ripens. Actually, ironically enough, it ripens about a week before the Merlot is ready. So yeah.
That's crazy. So just for the lay of the land for the listeners, we're driving down the 405 freeway, driving north, you make a hard right turn with your head and you might catch a glimpse of these vineyards, which are beautiful. But when I drove up and I walked in the gate, I realized and I felt like I was in the middle of what would have been traditional wine country.
Yeah.
And that's not what we're here. People have heard this idea that this vineyard exists, but this isn't a toy here. This is some serious winemaking. And the reason I showed up is because when we tasted together at the Four Seasons, I mean, I was blown away by the quality of the wine. Is that indicative of the terroir? I know it's indicative of your skill sets, of course. It's indicative of the age of the vines. Where are we drawing this character from?
First of all, the soil. Actually, let's go a little bit further back. Los Angeles County, Orange County, Southern California as a whole has a long, rich, and storied history in agriculture. The San Fernando Valley used to be small gardens, not small, but 1 to 5 acre farms and lots of orange groves. Everything east of the Los Angeles River, many decades, was grapevines. That's where they grew grapes. And it extended up into South Pasadena. I can still remember, I'm from Los Angeles. I can still remember driving down to San Diego to see my grandmother, and about whatever it was, 5-10 miles outside of Anaheim or Disneyland, it was just orange groves from there all the way down to Mission Viejo, where the hillsides became too steep, and then there was Lion Country Safari. And I would often just nap because it was just orange groves. It was boring, more boring than driving up the 5.
Yeah, Lion Country Safari.
Yeah. And so, the original owner, Tom Jones, he was president and CEO of Baxter Northrop.
Aerospace firm.
Yeah, big aerospace firm. And he wanted to live in a vineyard in his retirement. And he looked at properties up in North and Napa and Sonoma. And this is in the mid-'70s. And then he looked at Santa Barbara County, and he felt that was all still too far away from where he considered home. This property here in Bel Air and the Baxter Northrop offices in Pasadena, which he did still stay heavily involved in after his retirement.
You said a lot there. I'm going to back up just a little bit. You're talking about going to Anaheim. And for the listeners, I think it's really important to know that the wine trade in California really started here in Rancho Cucamonga and moved north into Los Angeles, where Los Angeles was a hotbed of winemaking. I mean, there was a ton of vineyards here.
Yeah.
And in Anaheim, where I think Pierce's disease got a hold of it and it killed basically the whole industry, but it was thriving at that point. But L.A., and you said South Pasadena, yeah, I mean, many of the streets in Los Angeles are named after the prominent vintners of the time. And then it moved to Napa.
Yeah. Or even Venus Street.
Yeah, right. That's right.
Vine, it means vine.
So I think it's important to know that this actually on the East Coast at that time, the request for California wine was rather voluminous, and we would ship from here, from Los Angeles. And I think consumers should understand that, because it's the terroir here is suited for that.
Yeah, there were nearly 200,000 acres of vines planted in LA County in 1893.
Yeah, wow.
That's a lot.
Isn't that fascinating?
That's a lot.
Fascinating.
And I mean, Southern California was the breadbasket to the country. It was farms out here.
Yeah.
The whole West Side prior to World War II was small family farms. A lot of row crops. But so back to what makes us
so here
what we are. So, winemaking isn't that big of a departure. Oh, and actually I would like to add that the city seal still has a grapevine on it.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's great.
Back when it was incorporated as a city, Los Angeles, that was one of the largest commodities that we produced in the county. We're on hillsides. We do have a small valley floor, so to speak, and we plant our white varietal Sauvignon Blanc there on the flats, and everything else is on hillsides. The Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Petit Verdot, and Cabernet Franc. We have mostly south-facing slopes, except for that little saddle that the left side is north-facing, and so it doesn't get as much sun. And and actually south and west-facing slopes. We have a wonderful maritime influence. We're 4 miles from the ocean, from
right
Santa Monica Bay.
Here, Sepulveda Pass, so to speak.
Yeah, and with the Sepulveda Pass, Santa Monica Mountains, so let's see, today we're probably 75 degrees. I know Thursday we're supposed to be at 90 where I live in the valley, in the San Fernando Valley. We'll probably hit 78, 80 here. Right now you can see the breezes and the trees. The ocean, the bay provides a cooling effect. Not as dramatic as, say, San Francisco Bay provides to the Los Carneros region,
right?
But it's there nonetheless. And we also have, the gate is about 30 feet above sea level. If you look behind you up the hill, we peak out at about 850 feet.
Wow, it's quite a change.
Yeah. We've got a variety of elevations, a variety of exposures. And from its inception, Tom Jones wanted Moraga to be modeled after a French house, making one white wine, one red wine. And that has been kind of our marching orders.
It's sort of
so to speak.
The part that is dynamic about this is that it's not this hobby idea. Clearly, when you drive up the drive and you see you're driving around the Jeep and you feel like you've immersed yourself in what would typically be a large part of the California wine country, but you're just in a very isolated area. But you've got all the facilities, we're in a tasting room right now. You've got the trucks driving around the vineyards. We're looking at beautiful vines out the tasting room window here. This is a functional, fully operational, serious attempt and success at making quality wines. And when I met you, I was at I think one of the preeminent Cabernet Sauvignon tastings in the state, put on by one of the great guys, Ian Blackburn, who does this. And every year I won't miss it. And I got to your table and I'm like, wow, this is really good. And then all of a sudden it was produced that the idea came out that it was from Bel Air. And so how does people find out about this place? I mean, what are they? I didn't know. I mean, I knew the rumor that it existed, but
yeah, and that's well, and that's why you're here today,
Right.
because I, as the winemaker and general manager, and the now owner, don't want this to be a secret. It was kind of a intimate club and was a hobby for a very long time. But all businesses need to make money. And some businesses are more difficult to make money at than others. There is now a big push for us to make sales, for us to make people aware that we're here and that we can make wines just as good as they can in Napa, if not better. So again, I don't feel I ever finished your original question. What makes us and able to make what we make. So from the beginning, in the late 70s, there were soil samples taken and they were shipped up to Cal State Fresno, and a couple of Tony Soter was the first consulting winemaker. He, with a company called Crop Care and Associates out of Napa. Tom Prentice is the president and primary partner. There's a couple other people. Bob Gallagher is one of them. Tom used to come down here. Dave Abreu isn't your vineyard consultant or vineyard manager. Tom Prentice is. Those are the two
really
heavy
okay.
hitters
Yeah.
in viticulture and viticulture consultancy up there. And actually, Tom consults up and down the state. In Hawaii, I know he's gone to India and China as well. So no, they know their stuff. And there are very few secrets in winemaking, but you pay for the experts' opinions. And so Bob Gallagher, he's been coming down here for nearly 40 years. And it's consistency in the people and the style and the types of barrels we purchase.
So when they took the samples, for the listeners, it's an interesting part of our industry, right? You can go to Europe or go to the Caucasus and grab some grape vines and bring them to America, plant them and hope they work and see what you get. Or you can hire a vineyardist. There's another term for those guys.
Viticulturalist.
Yeah. And they will come and they'll examine the soil and they'll say, well, based on the acid and the different organisms that are in the soil, you might do better with Syrah than Cabernet, or et cetera, et cetera. There's two choices. So here you've decided we're going to test the soil, figure out what we can grow. It turned out to be Bordeaux varietals for the most part.
Yeah, they planted everything. They planted some Sangiovese, they planted some Chardonnay, and they planted some Pinot. And actually, Pinot does very well here in LA, especially on
I've never
south
tasted
side
an LA
of-
appellated Pinot Noir.
There are a few out there.
Yeah.
So through those consultants, winemaking and viticulture, everything that they do at Screaming Eagle in the vineyard, we do here. Same consultant, and it's not just that it's what they do, it's their style.
Right.
It's no, that's the right thing to do.
Right.
And all viticulturalists or viticultural consultants will agree, and winemakers, yeah, that's what you should do. The only thing that we don't do is pull as many leaves. We get our weather a little differently than they do up north.
Right.
June is notoriously a foggy month here in LA. We've got, and all of Southern California, we've got the June gloom. Napa and Sonoma, June is a much sunnier and hotter month up there. And so they're relying upon the heat to allow the grapevine to grow a thick cuticle, a wax layer around the berry. Because we have so much fog in June, we're not able to develop that cuticle to be as thick. So we give a little bit more.
More canopy that way.
A little bit more canopy, not a lot.
Yeah.
There's still plenty of dappled sunlight that gets through the canopy, but we need to be a little bit more cautious and a little less aggressive than they are up north.
It's kind of interesting. This is not the first story that I've heard, and I'm very close to one of the other stories about the aerospace executives deciding once, in particular in the 70s, because El Segundo and all that still is actually a hotbed of aerospace. But the Wetzel family was executive, and they end up in Alexander Valley Vineyards in Sonoma. And so there was something in the 70s that's kind of interesting, besides the wealth built in the aerospace, but this dream of winery, this romantic lifestyle of being in the wine business. But then you said earlier, you kind of wanted to make some money at some point.
Well, yeah, I was reading something not too long ago that was talking about the boom of industry and that happened in the 50s and 60s. And then in the 70s with movies like A Clockwork Orange and Blade Runner and Star Wars,
Yeah.
That our utopia world that we all hoped we would end up in wasn't that at all. And in fact, the future was dirty. And in Blade Runner, rainy, and in Star Wars, technology wasn't reliable, like or R2D4,
Right.
The green the white and red tech droid that blew up and caused Luke Skywalker to end up with R2D2. I can't help but wonder if those executives in technology, in defense as well, weren't maybe a little disenchanted with the future that they helped bring.
That's interesting.
And that they helped bring forth unto the world.
Right.
And maybe they wanted to live a more pastoral existence.
Yeah, that's a pretty interesting thought. Wine Talks, of course, available on iHeartRadio, Pandora, Spotify, wherever you hang out for podcasting. Hey, have a listen to George Walker III. He is with Wade Cellars, the brainchild of Dwayne Wade, the famed basketball player, and they are making wines for the community around pricing and quality, trying to get a wine out there at the $15 to $20 range that you're going to appreciate. This is Wade Cellars. It's a crazy good conversation. I was up in Napa at the Association of African American Vineyards tasting and had a chance to catch up with these wines. Very good.
Yeah, you never know.
Well, it is. It is pastoral, and it is. I wrote this article the other day, and I won't get into the whole thing, but the end of it is basically wine is what it was 10,000 years ago. Effectively, we have more technologies to refine it, but effectively, nature has done the work for us. It's fermenting grapes and using it as a beverage that does something to us. It connects us to the soil or where it's from. I think that's a very important part of what we do, but having to make a buck at it to keep it going and make the lifestyle seem fruitful, just pouring money down the drain, which is very common in our industry.
Yeah.
And so now we arrive at this point where I meet you at the tasting and you're exposing the brand to the consumers. Can the consumer come and taste wine here?
They can. Everything is by appointment only. Some days we might have 2 or 3 tastings lined up.
Yeah.
Some days we don't have any. And then some days, things might be going on the property that don't allow us to have a tasting. But yeah, we can accommodate anywhere from 4 to 12 people. The table that we're at seats 12. And we also do corporate events anywhere from 10, 15 people to 75, 150.
What's the general reaction? And I would suspect even today, even though you've started some efforts to publicize what you do here, but what is the general reaction? Like, I never knew this existed. Like, what? I'm like, what?
Mostly that I never knew you existed.
Yeah.
Or, we've had people who have gone to the Getty. Excuse me, that's across the highway from us. And in fact, my dad, in his retirement, he was a docent at the Getty. And so we went there a couple of times. And on the tram ride up, and this is in the early 2000s, on the tram ride up, I looked and said to my wife, "Oh, I wonder if that's Moraga." I mean, I'm in the wine industry, obviously. I've known about it. I knew that it existed. And actually, I almost convinced myself that it wasn't, and it must have been someone else's property because I thought Moraga was further up Benedict Canyon, which we aren't. So yeah, it's funny. The Huntington, that is a travel destination here in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
It's been featured in numerous TV shows and movies. It's iconic. I would like at some point in time hold a position like that here in Los Angeles.
Right. I think you could.
There is the site's been used in a few television shows. Most recently, Modern Family. There was an episode where they went to Napa, and since they
I was going to say, it could be.
They really didn't have it in their budget to go to Napa, but we're right here.
Yeah, it's so much like it.
Yeah. And we are. For all the vineyards that are doing the right thing up there, we're doing it here as well. For their $100, $400, $1,600 bottles of wine, we're doing the same things.
It seems when you said that people don't know you're here, and it's not a huge facility as far as winemaking production. You said 700 to 800 cases on a good year. And last year was not such a good year. Are you hampered by the same types of conditions that would restrict not only the quantity of a wine from Napa or Lodi or wherever else, so as the quality, meaning weather, buds break when they are ready to pick, all those things are the same influences that control that in general?
In general, yes, but I would argue, and I don't think anyone would disagree with me once they heard my argument. The pressures are even more extreme here, and there are probably a few other vineyards outside of LA County or Orange County that have the same difficulties. And really that is mildew pressure. So mildew pressure is modeled under the assumption, but the guidelines are that the mildew pressure, if you have 8 hours of weather between 68 degrees and 90, your mildew pressure will increase by 20%. Where we are now, it's 75 degrees today. Overnight, going into tomorrow, when it's supposed to be 80 degrees or 78 degrees, we're going to have 3 8-hour periods where the temperature does not drop below 68 degrees. So if yesterday we had zero pressure, by the time we reach this time tomorrow, we will be at 60% mildew pressure.
Yeah, wow.
And then 2/3 into tomorrow, we will be at 100% mildew pressure. If it doesn't get over 90, we're going to be at 100% for the next 3 weeks or so. So typically a graph for mildew pressure, and this simply is when and how powdery mildew will sporulate, and then cause more powdery mildew molds to grow. This time of year, you will have a lot of overnight lows that drop into the 50s. So, if you climb up to 20 or 40 after 2 days, and then you have 3 nights below 68 degrees, very easily in the 50s, you'll drop to 10%. And then if you have a couple of days where they're at 68 degrees is the high, you won't accumulate any mildew pressure, and you'll drop down to 0 again. When that happens, to prevent powdery mildew, we spray fungicides. At this point in time, at this point of the year, we're spraying with stylet oil, which is mineral oil, spraying with elemental sulfur, 2 organic products. And there's usually a window of 7 to 10 days after you spray that you then need to return and spray again. With some commercial milticides or fungicides, you can have a 14 to 17 day window and also a 17 to 21 day window. When you get to the end of your spray window, if you're at 0 pressure, you can let that ride a few days and not have to go out and spray. And then as soon as the temperature rises again, then you spray. And that's responsible farming. But when after 2 days you have 100% mildew pressure and you've just sprayed, we just started our spray cycle again yesterday, Monday, and we'll finish tomorrow. And because of the weather, we're going to have, because it's so wonderful down here.
I think that's an important feature. Not to interrupt you, but because I think I want the listeners to understand, you're spraying because you're protecting the crop. And I think this world of organic and biodynamic and all the things that are going on in the marketplace today, claiming health value, et cetera, need to understand that you're spraying organic products. They're there to save, make sure the crop propagates and you don't just spoil a thing. And that goes back to the business of wine. You're here to make a bottle of wine, change somebody's lifestyle by having that bottle of wine around. And at the same time, in order to get that done, you need to do the things that need to get done.
Yeah, we do. But also, I don't want to spray every 7 days.
Right.
If I can, it costs me more. I've got people that can be other things that have other things to do, but also we're in the middle of a neighborhood. Not that these are noxious materials. Again, we're spraying with mineral oil and elemental sulfur. You probably breathe in more sulfur on the 405 freeway sitting in traffic than you would in the vineyard. But no, it is as trying to be a responsible farmer. I don't want to have to just do it because I can do it. I'll do it when I need to do it.
That's an important feature. So when you're done with this, you're pushing all the buttons on the envelope of making wine. You're in a different neighborhood than most winemakers. There's not I would suspect that there's not readily available all the things that you would be able to go down the street in Napa to get. What's the end game? What are we trying to do here? We're trying to produce the best wine we can in the bottle so that the consumer says, oh, this is Moraga. And I'm going to go back to that tasting again. That was sort of a semi-trade tasting in the morning, and then the consumers came at night. You said earlier you're 100% direct to consumer. Everything you sell here goes through from your hand to the consumer.
Yeah,
And
entirely.
through a club,
We have a
online
wine
sales.
we have a wine club. We have our mailing list. We have local wine shops and restaurants that carry our wine, but we sell directly to them. We don't have a distributor. We don't have a broker. We have a woman who's in charge. She's our sales manager
Yeah.
and our director of sales. But I'm not a big person on titles.
I remember her. She was
but-
at the tasting, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, Suzette. And then we have Philip, and he's in charge of our wine club and events. And events would be tastings for the consumer when they call us up or email us saying, hey, I would love to come
Right.
to Moraga and taste your wine.
Are we selling everything we make right now?
No, we are not.
And so, I mean, and I'm going to go to the marketing side of things now. So this is what I did most of my life. Come to the tasting. You have 12 people one day for a tasting, and they go, "Wow, this is amazing! I didn't know you existed." And is there a club? And then you solicit club memberships at these points.
Yeah.
And see, and then the club is quarterly.
Well, no. With the club, you get, and I'm not going to say you have to buy wine to join the club. If you want to just email, say,
Yeah,
I would
right.
like to be on your mailing
Nice.
list and join your club,
Sure.
you join the club that way. But it gets you access to the property and our release events. And so we're now having, we had been doing before COVID, pre-COVID, we had one release a year, and it was always in May. And then post-COVID, we turned it into a harvest party. The property owners, they weren't comfortable with, certainly in 2020, having a release.
Sure.
And then working into 2021, things weren't all that open
No,
in spring
they're
of
a mess.
21. And so we ended up not doing anything in 2021. And then in 2022, we had a harvest release party. And so it was in late September. And we had our release party in October, or September, October. And so now we're going to be having a spring summer release that's going to, we will release our white wine at that time. And then in the fall, we will continue to have a harvest party, and we will release our red at that time. Again, the pre-COVID release had both the red and the white. One thing that people continually ask for is access. That's Wine Club. It's a beautiful property here.
Yeah, no, that's what it is.
It's gorgeous. I mean, you could, on a slightly breezy day like today, you can't even hear the 405 freeway. Most days you can't if it's not breezy. And, it's, hopefully you can have some website, whatever, have some pictures of what you saw here today. But this is just a hidden gem.
It is.
It's a gorgeous place. And, the Rupert Murdoch owns Moraga Vineyards. He is committed to preserving it, keeping this land as agriculture, and continuing the tradition that we've long since established in California winemaking.
It seems like, and we were in Lodi. We were in Temecula last week. I did a very similar conversation like this with a young family who's trying to make a go of wine in Temecula. And there was a stark difference between what I tasted at the tasting with you and what I taste down in Temecula. And this is not a diss on Temecula. The point about it is that technology or that area has been around for a long time in the wine world. I featured a 1988 wine from Temecula, but they've never gotten the traction that not only in technology, but the winemaking talent to come to make wines of interest. And I thought the wines were solid that I tasted the other day, but they weren't refined like the ones that we tasted from here. I've always wondered why that happens and why Temecula's never really gotten that traction. Callaway was down there for a long time, and that was very well known. And that was maybe because of the investment by Eli Callaway that they got that working. But there seems to be something here, and I think you saw my expression when I tasted the wines at the tasting, that was an eyebrow-raising quality. And that must be from not only the terroir, but your experience getting here.
Yeah, Scott Rich, who was the former winemaker, and he learned under Tony Soter. So he graduated from UC Davis a couple of years before I did. He graduated with a master's. I graduated with a bachelor's. He was actually he was an engineer with the Department of Transportation, and if I remember correctly,
the regular path, huh?
he designed freeway on ramps and off ramps, I believe,
No,
and helped develop that whole corridor off the 5 in Southern Orange County stuff. It took him a while to learn what it was he really wanted to do in life, and I figured it out when I was in college. Lucky me. Believe me, I'm not disparaging him in any way. I have the utmost respect for Scott. He's a terrific winemaker. He's a good person. But with COVID, he getting down here as often as he liked was very difficult. And I think COVID was very bleak for a lot of people, myself included. But he and I cut our teeth about the same time. Tony Soter was doing a whole bunch of research in ripening and seed hardening. And I was able to talk to him about that because when I was at Trefethen, he was making wine on Big Ranch Road at what's now the Lewis Cellars facility. And so, everything that we learned differently, but at the same time, we were learning from similar people, and all the advances that were happening, we were all part of that. And going through his records and his notes, we have very similar winemaking styles.
So let's go back to that, where that came from. I mean, you left UC Davis, and your path, and that's what I'm trying to get to, is your path to here wasn't serendipitous. You went to a lot of places, and you had to get a lot of experience, and I think that comes out in what you taste.
Yeah, thank you. No, while I was still in school, I did an internship at Gloria Ferrer there in Shelbyville. Sparkling wine in Carnaus. After I graduated from UC Davis, they asked me to return. And then from there, because that was sparkling, I finished off that harvest in 95 at Maryvale, working for Bob Levy. And then from there, I spent a year at Newton Vineyards, working for John Kongsgaard, and then John left to start up Luna Vineyards, which now isn't there anymore.
But, a lot of that going around.
And Bob Swain took over, and he's now retired. But he was making wine up in Mendocino great. I can't remember that winery now either. But then from Newton Vineyards, I called in a few favors, and I worked for Philip Shaw at Rosemount Estates in New South Wales. And
I'm going to stop you right there for two reasons. One is, I just had a thought when you said you were Gloria Ferrer. Is that like being, if you're a French baker and you come out of pastry school, you sort of have to declare whether you're going to be a boulanger, a bread baker, or a pâtisserie, or a pastry maker? Do you kind of decide, like, I'm in the sparkling wine world, but I'm going to go into the still side? Or is that
well, actually, they were making some still wine. They were developing their still Chardonnay and Pinot program. And I worked with them on that.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And that was actually, despite their size, that was my introduction to small scale winemaking.
But then you go to Rosemount, which is huge.
Well,
and it's just for the thing, it's New Zealand for Australia for the.
Yeah. Well, I'll back up just a second. So it was small scale winemaking there. And then at Newton Vineyard, John is an amazing winemaker. I think I was incredibly fortunate in working for the people that I did, because they looked at wine a little differently than a lot of other winemakers. Now, I'm not going to say that some of them weren't jerks and that they like to yell at people.
Personality notwithstanding.
But you know what? Philip Shaw, because of just when I got there, my first day, I'd flown into Sydney, had to take a 3.5-hour train ride to Muswellbrook, and they were in a little town called Denman, about 20 kilometers outside that. It was like a town of 1,500 people, something like that. I asked Philip Shaw how much wine they were making, and can I swear?
Yeah.
he said, "Fuck if I know." And this was the middle of February, end of February, and he said, "I was supposed to be making 700,000 cases of wine this year at the beginning of February. That's what they forecasted. I've now bottled 1.3.
Wow.
I don't know.
Doubled it.
Yeah. And this was when, so this was 1997, and all of the Australian animal labels were coming out. You had the Big Eye and the kangaroo. And
it was when Australian wines were pretty popular in America.
Yeah. In addition to the $8 bottle of Rosemount
Shiraz.
Shiraz or I mean the 90,000 cases of Shiraz and Chardonnay that they're making that was selling for whatever, less than $10 a bottle. They were also making tremendous amounts of small scale wines that were 400, 1,600, 5,000 cases for their release for the year. They had a wine that was called the Giant Steps Chardonnay, and that was 800 cases or something like that. And then they had the Balmoral Syrah that was a very Rhone inspired wine, as opposed to a Shiraz. And they made 1,400 cases of that.
That's interesting.
They were making all these. Some of these wines had recipe books. There were other wines that it was this is the style. This is what we're going to make, and this is what the consumer wants. But we've also developed the consumer for this product. And so while it was a huge facility, there was lots of cool stuff going on as well.
That's the first time in 350 episodes that I've heard a winery. Maybe it's happened. It just wasn't discussed. Producing what we call formula wines for the supermarket. And like I said, I can't remember the 97, 98, 99, if that was part of the boom for Australian wines. The Australian wines have ebbed and flowed in America. Now you don't see much of them. You used to see all of them all the time. Rosemont, Penfolds, they're all here. But it's the first time I've heard somebody talk about a winery that does both, that's creating that mass brand, which we need the mass brands. We need those brands for people to remember what they tasted and go back and buy it again because they're become wine drinkers. And then they learn and experience, and maybe maybe that's their marketing strategy.
It happens. Some wineries are a lot larger than the consumer perceives them to be.
I think you point to a champagne house like, Veuve Clicquot, and you find out that it's not so unique.
Well, even here in California, I don't want to name names.
Well, so you've come. Let's go. Let's put it this way.
But there's a well-known producer,
of course,
in Napa, and everyone thinks they make 20,000 cases of Sauvignon Blanc. Yes. But they really, when I left Napa, it was in 2009. They were making 120, 140,000 cases of it.
But what's funny, interesting, from a number standpoint, you went from a winery, maybe didn't come directly here after Rosemont, but 700,000 cases, quote unquote, and that became a million, but down to 700 cases, which is a considerably different program.
Well, so after Rosemont, I went to work at Chateau Patel. I worked for Jean-Noël and Marquetta.
Jean-Noël, my buddy. I'd love to go see him again.
And he's a good guy.
He's a great guy.
He's a good guy. And Marquetta is wonderful too. Jean-Noël's the marketer. Marquetta was the winemaker. Still on Highway
29, right?
They used to be up on Mount Veeder. So they are now on Highway 29. Yeah. Just south of St. Helena. Jean-Noël kept the winery and the brand, and Marquetta started handmade by Marquetta. Yeah. But no, Marquetta was a terrific winemaker, and I learned she was trained in France in her winemaking, and from her, she strove to make even Zinfandel, which they were really known for, in a more classic old world style. Mm-hmm. And
that's true.
And I'm not going to say that's a trick, but that's a skill, and it's highly developed. And
did you work for her then when she was doing
that? I worked for her for 2.5 years. Yeah. And you know what? Everything there. So, they're mass-produced wines. Their Central Coast Chardonnay, their Amador County Zin, they did about 3,000 cases of. Yeah. But what they were known for was their VGS Chardonnay, which they made 600 cases of, and their VGS Cab, which they made 400 cases of, and their VGS Zinfandel, which they made 1,200 cases of. Right. And those wines, at the time in '97, the Chardonnay was $45 a bottle, the Cab was 75 or so, and the Zin was somewhere in between.
Excuse me. I remember the wine well. Yeah. And you're right. You're absolutely right. I think I bought the 89s and 87s. I can't remember. But it was that sort of non-Lodi, non-opulent, overdone Zin, much more structured than what the California usually offers in the world of Zinfandel, which would be more old world in character. Yeah. So that was your last stint in Napa?
No. From there, I went to Trefethen Family Vineyards, and I was there for 9 years.
Another well-known established brand.
Yeah, and started as assistant winemaker. After a few years, promoted to associate winemaker, and when I left, I had been winemaker for 2 years.
Wow.
And then at that time, so I'm originally from LA. I live in LA currently, and I was approached by Bill Foley, who had an opportunity in the Central Coast. And
The famed Bill Foley, who owns, who knows how much he owns.
well,
A lot.
he owns Foley Family Wines. I think now he's at 26 vineyards
Yeah,
or
right.
properties,
Yeah, wineries.
mostly predominantly in California. He still has Walla Walla. He has a couple of brands in Oregon, and then he has the wineries in New Zealand and a couple of strategic alliances
Right.
with Italy and I think Chile. But with him, I was hired to start a high-end red Bordeaux program. That was about 400 cases, and he liked what I was doing. And so he asked me to take over for Firestone, and so which is the facility I was working out of. And then, I slowly became the fix-it guy. I was able to turn Firestone around in less than 2 years. And when I say turn around, it's, they weren't known for getting good scores.
He bought Firestone
He bought Firestone in August of 2007.
from Brooks Firestone.
Well,
the
from the family, yeah. And
I didn't know it was struggling. Was it struggling?
I'm not going to say it was struggling, but the children and the grandchildren, they didn't want any part of it.
See no more. Say no more.
And his father started Firestone Rubber and Tire.
Yeah.
He knew that tires wasn't where his future, where he was destined to go.
Yeah.
And so we started the winery. And again, maybe that's, as I was talking about,
But wait a
the future that they brought upon all of us. There was no family plan,
Yeah.
and no one in the family wanted to lead it. Adam Firestone, he had already started up Firestone Walker with his brother-in-law David Walker,
the beer, yeah.
and they had already purchased the brewery in Paso Robles and moved it up there, and they were being contract brewed across the country. And
Firestone being one of the first sort of notable Central Coast wineries, particularly certainly the name didn't hurt.
Yeah.
But those are the days where you could go to a tasting like I visited you on, and he'd be pouring, Dickie Smothers would be pouring, Pat Paulson would be pouring, Dick Sanford would be pouring, all those guys, because it was the love of what they were doing. It wasn't the celebrity status of who they were. It was more of the love of making wine.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And, and that's, having come from Napa where it was the celebrity rock star winemaker,
Yeah, right.
and coming to Santa Barbara where, I met some amazing winemakers who I had held in the highest esteem, just like, oh my God. And you can have it for such a reasonable price. And when I met these people, they were like, hey, how's it going? And here I am like,
You had this whole different vision of what might be.
yeah, well,
reoccurring.
and I'm pleased that it ended up being the way it was because, they were slightly more down to earth people like myself. I mean, I'm not trying to,
Well, but that's,
I'm not sounding very humble saying that.
no,
but,
I don't think that's arrogant at all.
but yeah, it was an entirely different community, and it was great. I love making wine there. And I actually, in the summer of 17, I moved the family back to LA to care for my dad who had Alzheimer's. And
Oh, wow.
and so I started up a small consultancy, managing some vineyards in the Malibu coast and doing some winemaking here in LA in Malibu, and also had a client. And that's actually what brought me here. I got a call kind of out of the blue one day from Rupert Murdoch's executive assistant saying, "We need a winemaker. Can you help us out?" I said, "Okay. What do you want me to do? I can help you hire somebody. I can hire somebody for you and mentor them, or I can do it myself." And it took them a few days, but they talked it over, and they said, "I think we'd like to talk to you, and I think we'd like you to take this on yourself." And I said, "Okay, great."
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
And so
okay,
a week
whatever
later,
you want.
I was having lunch with Rupert and his then wife, Jerry Hall, and we had a terrific lunch and got to know each other fairly well, and went through some of the wines, went through the barrel room, walked around the vineyard, talked to the guys, and I left that day with a job offer.
Wow. That's great.
And so that was roughly 3 years ago.
Congratulations. That's a great story, and it's a great history. We're out of time, if you can believe it. It's been almost an hour. And so I love the fact that we arrived at how you arrived here. The end of the show is when you started, and so we have so much more to talk about because your knowledge of the history of wine and your experience that we must do this again. And in fact, I think what I'm going to do is schedule a tasting with a group, my friends
Okay.
who have no idea that you're here, and we'll make an evening out of it. End up in Beverly Hills for dinner or something. And enjoy this view here. But such a pleasure to meet you. And I'm so happy I stopped by the booth and had a chance to taste the wines and just hear the story.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. No, we're doing a lot of things that we haven't done historically.
Right.
And talking to press, it was every 5 years or so, we'd send some wines out for reviews. We'd have some, doing air quotes, heavy hitters
Yeah, right.
in wine, in wine media. And but no, we want people to know about us and know that we are accessible.
Well,
And that we're
gonna
here
tell
and
a
that
lot of
we
people this.
like to share our wines.
So Moraga, is there a website?
It's moragabelair.com.
Yeah,
Moragea.
put that up in front of this. Moragabelair.com. And really, I think we're going to have a lot of fun working with this here because I think people will freak when they see this because it's, like I said, it doesn't feel like it is not a hobby. This is legit winemaking at a legit level that your wines were rivaling the wines of the stars of Cabernet tasting, which came from all over the state. So
Yeah,
congratulations
thank you.
on that.
Thank you very much.
But thanks again for the time and cheers.
Yeah, thank you.